Hello and welcome to another running video. It's Monday the 30th of October and it's about 6:15 in the morning and I'm off on my morning run. And I'm going to talk to you in this video, or this part one of this video, about a book I read recently which is called Born to Run. It's written by a gentleman named Christopher McDougall, who is a journalist who has written articles for Men's Health magazine and running magazines and things like that, and then he decided to write this book. Now, the book isn't about Bruce Springsteen, despite the title, and has nothing to do with him. And when I first started to read it, I thought it was a bit like a Van Morrison album that's called Born to Sing, No Plan B, in that this guy was going to write about his life and how he was born to run and so on. And it turns out that wasn't the case. But the book is called Born to Run for a completely different reason. And I'm going to sort of, in the first part of this video, try and explain to you what that is. So this Christopher McDougall had an interest in running, and he'd become very interested in the ultra running community. Now, as far as I can determine, the ultra running community are those people who run races whose minimum distance is greater than the standard marathon, which is 42.6 k's. Now, because McDougall's an American, everything in the book is in imperial measure and talks about miles all the time. So the ultra running community, those people who routinely run 60, 70, 80, even 100-mile races, not all in one day, of course, but over a course of a weekend and over a period of time. And he'd become very interested in this. And there are a lot of ultra running events in America. In particular, one that's particularly famous is one that happens in the Rocky Mountains. I can't remember the name of the event, but it happens in the Rocky Mountains at altitude. And so, of course, that adds to the complexity of the event. Within the ultra running community, there is knowledge of a group of Indians called the Tarahumaru, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly. That's a Spanish word, and I don't speak Spanish, so I hope I've pronounced that correctly. But they are Indians who live in the Sierra Madre Mountains, which are in the northwest of Mexico, in what is called the Copper Canyon country, which is very, very hot and inhospitable, rocky and barren. And some of the people who are part of these Indian tribes still live in caves. Others live in more traditional houses. They live in very isolated communities and have very little to do with the rest of the world other than their own tribes. But they are famous for running very, very long distances, and also for running in either bare feet or shoes that are very, very thin. So one of the other things Christopher McDougall wanted to do in this book was to promote the idea of barefoot running. Now, before you throw away your shoes and think this is what I'm telling you to do, I'll be clear. I run in shoes. I run in shoes because I'm afraid of stepping in or on something, because my feet are very soft, because I wear shoes and socks all the time, as most people's feet are. So it would take, if you're going to become a barefoot runner, it takes a lot of time to condition your feet to be hard enough to absorb, to cope with the running on gravel, running on roads, running on concrete, or running on bush tracks. So I'm not advocating that, but Christopher McDougall certainly was in his book. And as I say, he talks about these Tarahumaru Indians who do run very long distances in bare feet. But the gist of the book is that human beings were born to run. And getting into some anthropology for a moment, taking a long time to get to this point in the story or in the book. It's a work of non-fiction, but taking a long time to get to this point, he puts forward the idea that at one stage in human development, there were two branches of the human tree as we know human beings today, or hominids as we know ourselves today. One group were called the Neanderthals. I think we used to say Neanderthals, but now we say Neanderthals. I'm not sure why. But Neanderthals were people, what we would consider to be cave-dwelling people They were very strong, sturdy, robust people who could not walk upright. They walked in a more crouched way like gorillas and other apes. And that was in part because of their skeleton, but also in part because of their foot. And I'm going to come back to the foot in a bit more detail in a moment. But the other branch of the family were called the Australopithecines. Australopithecines were found in Africa and even in parts of Australia. And they were able to walk upright. And they were able to walk upright in part because of their skeleton and the structure of their spine, but also because of the structure of their foot. Now, the Neanderthals had almost a flat foot, a much broader foot than the Australopithecines. They also had much longer toes, and that's important because when you walk, apparently your toes grip the surface you're walking on in a different way than your toes act when you're running. And because the Neanderthals had this flat foot, or almost flat foot. So if you look at a chimpanzee's foot or a gorilla's foot, it is almost flat. It has an arch, but it's a very small arch. And because their foot is almost flat, they're very good at walking, but they can't run, not in the sense that we understand running. Now, the Australopithecines, who eventually became human beings as we know them today, they had the advantage of having this foot that's very similar to the foot we have now. And I'm told in the book that among people who study the human body, that the human foot and the ankle joint is one of the most perfect pieces of architecture and engineering that anyone could imagine. And that's because the bone structure allows the weight of the body allows the foot to take the weight of the body, which of course it does when you're standing upright. It allows the weight of the body to be distributed evenly over the full range of the foot. Bear in mind here that I'm not a podiatrist. I don't know anything about feet other than I've got a pair and I run on them, and I'm just reporting what I read in this book, and as best I understand it, that the muscles allow the foot to flex in ways that other animals' feet can't, and in ways that the Neanderthals' feet couldn't, and that the tendons act as shock absorbers. Now, the most important thing about the human foot is the arch. And because we have that arch in our foot, we are able to run. And I can say, because the Neanderthals did not have an arch in their foot, they were not able to run. They were able to walk and walk briskly, but not able to run. Now, this is important because not only does it mean you could move a lot faster, you could get from one place to the other more quickly than if you just had to walk, but it also had to do with the way that you pursued your food. The Australopithecines, which include these Tarahumaru Indians and Kalahari Bushmen and Zulu people of Africa, for example, are notorious for being able to run extraordinarily long distances, and then in the case of the Zulu, for example, fight a full-pitched battle. But in the case of the Kalahari Bushmen, they are able to chase down an animal and literally run it to death because they are so good at running long distances and using their body the way it's designed. So the born to run argument was that the human body, as we know it now, has evolved and is designed so that we can run, and because we can run, we're better able to. The survival of that branch of the human tree was more guaranteed than the other branch of the human tree. It appears that the Neanderthals were very good at trapping large animals who can't move very fast in pits and things like that, and had weapons that they could hunt those animals with. But when those animals became extinct through climate change or vegetation change or moved into a different location, it became harder and harder for the Neanderthals to find their food. Whereas in the case of the Australopithecines, because they had this ability to run, they could literally run an animal to death. In part 2, I'm going to explain a little bit about that and cooling systems, but I'll just say for the moment they could literally run an animal to death. Now, I'm going to touch briefly on running shoes in a moment, and I'll continue talking about that in the second part of this video. But the running shoe as we know it, as I said, first of all, Christopher McDougall was talking about barefoot running, or running with a very little between the foot and the road, so that the arch could do its thing and the foot could work the way it's supposed to work. The modern running shoe as we know it was invented by Nike, or Nike, however you say that, in time for the 1972 Olympics, which I think were in Montreal. Before that, the running shoe as we know it didn't exist. What happened was that people who ran sprint events, like the 100 metres, 200 metres and so on, they ran with spikes, and the people who ran distance events, like 5,000 metres or whatever it was in those days, and 10,000 metres and so on, they ran in what when I was a kid we used to call a sand shoe or a tennis shoe, which was a shoe that had a canvas top and had a very, very thin rubber sole that had just an inner lining, which I think is actually called the sock of the shoe, to absorb sweat, but had very little cushioning between itself and the foot, so that you actually had contact with and felt the surface you were running on. Now, when Nike invented the running shoe, they also inadvertently created the running injury. And because according to McDougall, the sorts of running injuries that people have these days did not exist before the running shoe. People certainly probably strained their hamstrings and maybe rolled their ankle and so on, but some of the other running injuries that people have these days didn't happen before the running shoe was invented. And that's in part because running shoes these days are so engineered that the things that the foot should do naturally by itself, in particular the arch should do by itself, it doesn't do anymore, because all of that is taken up by the engineering and the padding and the sculpting that goes around supposedly providing the arch with support. But in Christopher McDougall's version of events, it's actually taking away from the arch the job that it should be doing itself, and transplanting it to the engineered part of the shoe. And so I'm going to, as I said, talk about that in more detail in the next video, but we're coming to the close of the first video, and I'm just on my way down Fitzroy Street towards Marsden Weir, and then I'll pick up the commentary in the second part of the video and talk more about shoes and also cooling systems for runners in the next. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this part and that you'll tune in for the next part. Any comments or feedback are most welcome, and I'll talk to you again in the next video.